You know, people always talk about childhood like it's supposed to be this perfect, golden chapter in your life, all scraped knees, birthday balloons, and bedtime stories. And for the most part, I guess mine looked that way from the outside. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, raised by two people who gave me everything a kid could need: a warm bed, home-cooked meals, and the kind of love that always showed up, even when I didn't deserve it. But there was always this silence in the background. An unspoken truth that sat at the dinner table with us every night. I was adopted. My parents never lied to me about it. In fact, they told me early on, like they wanted me to grow up proud of the fact that I was chosen. I nodded along when they explained, too young to understand the weight of what that really meant. But as I got older, that single word started to feel less like a badge of honor and more like a question mark stitched into my identity. I'd stare at the mirror sometimes, searching for clues in my face. Whose eyes were these? Where did I get this stubborn chin, or the way I curled my fingers when I was deep in thought? My parents couldn't answer that, no matter how much they loved me. And that quiet ache, that need to know, only grew stronger with time. The real questions began to haunt me around middle school, right when the world starts teaching you about family trees and heritage. My classmates could trace their roots back generations, rattling off stories about great-grandparents and old countries. And me? I couldn't even name the woman who gave me life. I asked my parents once, just once, about her. I remember the way my mom's hand paused over her coffee cup, her fingers tightening ever so slightly before she gave me the kind of gentle, practiced answer that told me she'd rehearsed it 100 times. All we know, sweetheart, is that she was young and wanted you to have a better life. Better life. Those words rattled around my head for years. Was that the whole story? Or was it just the part that made it easier to sleep at night? When I turned 18, I finally decided to search. I didn't make a big deal about it. No dramatic speeches, no storming out the door with a suitcase in hand. I just sat alone at my laptop one night and typed her name into the search bar. Except there was one problem. I didn't have her name. All I had was a birth certificate stamped, adopted. No mother's name. No father's name. Just a sterile set of numbers, a date, and a hospital name I'd driven past 100 times without a second thought. That was the moment it hit me. I was searching for a ghost. And I had no idea how long the hunt would take, or how much it would change me along the way. The moment I realized I had no name, no photograph, not even a letter, it hit me harder than I expected. I thought the hard part was going to be handling the emotions, but the real enemy was silence. Absolute, unshakable silence. At first, I tried convincing myself I didn't care, that it was just curiosity, not need. But curiosity doesn't follow you into adulthood like a shadow. Need does. And the more I tried to bury it, the louder it knocked inside my head. I started small, looking through old papers my adoptive parents kept tucked away in the hallway closet. Legal forms, hospital bills, court documents, all of them so cold and clinical, you'd think I was a line item on a spreadsheet, not a newborn baby once held in someone's arms. From there, I moved to the internet, like any modern person would. I joined every adoption forum I could find, scrolling late into the night, reading stories of people like me. Some who found their families, some still searching, and some who gave up entirely. The more I read, the more obsessed I became. There were nights I barely slept, combing through online databases, hoping the right name or date would fall into place like a puzzle piece. I sent away for non-identifying information from the adoption agency, but all I got back was a single sheet of paper. No names, just descriptions. Asterisk, your birth mother was in her early 20s. Brown hair. Average height. No mention of the father. That was it. A few vague sentences, like a police sketch of a life I'd never seen. But I wasn't ready to give up. I started using ancestry websites, swabbing the inside of my cheek and mailing off the samples like I was sending a message in a bottle. Weeks passed. I checked my email every morning like a kid waiting for Santa Claus, hoping that when I logged in, there'd be a match. The first few were distant cousins, names I didn't recognize, faces that didn't light any spark of familiarity. I sent polite, awkward messages, and most of the time I got silence. A few answered back, kind but cautious. None of them had answers. It felt like a cruel game. The more I searched, the more invisible she became. And with every dead end, a part of me wondered if she was even alive. If she'd ever want to be found. But then, about 2 years into the search, something changed. I logged in one evening and there it was. Close family match found. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might stop altogether. I clicked the name. It was unfamiliar, a last name I didn't recognize, no profile picture, no real bio. Just an anonymous account. But the connection strength didn't lie. Whoever this person was, they weren't a distant cousin. They were close. Very close. It felt like the walls around my world were shifting, like I was about to step into a room I'd been staring at through glass for years. But there was one thing I hadn't expected. The last name. It tugged at the back of my brain, as if I'd heard it before but couldn't quite place it. I brushed it off at first. I mean, the world's full of coincidences, right? But curiosity got the better of me, and I did what anyone would do. I typed the name into Google. The first few results were harmless enough. People with the same last name, scattered across the country. But then I scrolled further, and there it was. A face. A face I'd seen more times than I could count. On TV. On magazine covers. On giant billboards in Times Square. My stomach dropped. There was no way. No chance. This wasn't possible. But the resemblance was undeniable. The timelines fit. The DNA didn't lie. I had spent years searching for a stranger. And the whole time, the world already knew her name. I must have stared at that screen for a full 5 minutes, unmoving. You'd think that after years of chasing shadows, of digging through empty records and stale government forms, I'd be ready for a moment like this. But I wasn't. The face looking back at me from the search results wasn't some stranger pulled from obscurity. It was a woman I'd seen practically my whole life. A household name. The kind of celebrity that gets invited to charity galas, late-night talk shows, and red carpet premieres. Her eyes were sharp but kind, the same eyes that stared back at me in the mirror every morning of my life. I just never realized it until now. I kept refreshing the page, convinced that the algorithm had glitched or that I'd made some rookie mistake. But the more I dug, the harder the truth became to ignore. The last name, the DNA match, the timelines, the eerie overlap of my own vague, state-issued adoption file and her biography, publicly available for the world to see. The pieces clicked into place, whether I was ready for them or not. And then came the strangest part, a feeling I wasn't prepared for. You'd think I'd be ecstatic, or furious, or overwhelmed. But instead I felt numb. Like my brain hit the emergency brakes and refused to process the information. For days I barely slept. I went through the motions at work like a ghost. On the outside, life kept moving, emails to answer, bills to pay, groceries to buy. But inside, I was stuck in that moment, looping the discovery over and over. How do you even begin to wrap your head around something like that? One day, you're just a regular guy, raised in a quiet neighborhood by 2 loving parents who gave you a normal, small life. And the next, you find out the woman who brought you into this world lives in a mansion behind gates you've only ever seen from a distance, under camera flashes and the weight of public adoration. And I kept asking myself the same question on repeat. Why? Why give me up? Why disappear? Why go on to live this life? A life of luxury, fame, power, while I was left behind, invisible, unknown? There's this weird thing that happens when you grow up adopted. You build stories in your head, little daydreams to soften the blow. I'd spent years telling myself maybe she was too young, or too poor, or too scared. Maybe she had no choice. But now I knew the truth. She wasn't some lost soul scraping by. She'd become someone the world admired, respected. And that knowledge did something to me. It shifted the ground under my feet, made me question everything I thought I understood about who I was and where I came from. I avoided telling anyone at first, even my closest friends. I wasn't sure if it was shame or shock or plain disbelief, but the words wouldn't leave my mouth. I'd open my phone, stare at her Instagram page, watch interviews on YouTube, rewind talk show clips, searching for clues, trying to spot some hint of regret on her face, some hidden trace of me in her voice. But I found nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger to myself. My past wasn't just a blank slate anymore. It was a puzzle I couldn't solve without her. And that left me with only one option. I had to find her. Not as a fan. Not as a stranger. But as her son. I just didn't know how to start. I wish I could say I jumped straight into action the moment I pieced it all together. That I sent an email, picked up the phone, or knocked on her front door like I belonged there. But the truth is I froze. For weeks, I sat on the knowledge like it was some fragile, volatile secret. Just having her name, her face, her life at my fingertips should have been enough to ignite some grand confrontation, but it wasn't. Every time I imagined reaching out, I hesitated. The words never seemed right. The timing never felt right. And deep down, I couldn't shake the thought. What if she doesn't want to know me? I spent nights scrolling through every article, interview, and old photograph I could find. I memorized her mannerisms from televised events, her voice from podcasts, her smile from red carpet photos. I imagined what her laugh might sound like in real life. I even wondered whether I'd unknowingly passed her on the street one day, the universe playing some cruel trick on me. But the longer I waited, the heavier the silence became. I couldn't carry it any longer. So I started small. A letter. I wrote it out longhand on a yellow legal pad, the way people used to before the world got too fast for feelings. I must have rewritten it a dozen times, each version sounding either too angry, too formal, too desperate, or too cold. In the end, I settled for honesty. I told her the facts. My birth date, the adoption, the DNA match, and the simple truth that I wasn't looking for money, or fame, or anything at all except one thing, answers. I mailed it to an address I wasn't even sure was still valid. A P.O. box I'd dug up from an old article. And then I waited. Days passed. Then weeks. I tried not to let it consume me, but every ring of my phone, every notification ping, sent my heart racing. I had never wanted to hear from someone so badly in my entire life. And then one evening, when I had nearly convinced myself I would never hear back, I opened my inbox. A single new message. No subject line. No signature. Just 5 words. I think we should talk. My stomach dropped. My hands shook as I clicked open the message. The email was simple, almost painfully so. She acknowledged receiving my letter. Said she needed time to process it. Said she wasn't ready to give me all the answers yet, but she wasn't ignoring me. That was all it took. A single reply, and suddenly the world felt different. Not fixed. Not healed. But different. We started exchanging messages. Slowly. Cautiously. Each reply was like walking a tightrope between two worlds, the son I'd always been, and the stranger I still was to her. She told me bits and pieces about her past, but carefully, like she was handing me jigsaw puzzle pieces one at a time. She'd been young, scared, and nowhere near ready to raise a child when I was born. Her career had barely begun. She'd been pressured, even cornered, by people around her to let me go. She never said it outright, but the regret bled through the gaps in her words. Eventually, after weeks of this slow, digital dance, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. Would you like to meet? I stared at those words for what felt like an eternity before answering. The day we met, the world seemed almost too ordinary for something so monumental. No flashbulbs, no paparazzi, no velvet ropes. Just a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, her choice. Somewhere out of sight, where fame wouldn't follow her, and nerves wouldn't strangle me. I spotted her before she spotted me. She looked exactly as she did on magazine covers, yet so much smaller, so much more human, without the armor of makeup and camera lenses. She wore no designer clothes, no signature jewelry, just jeans and a simple sweater, like any other person. When she turned and locked eyes with me, it was like looking into a funhouse mirror. My own features reflected back at me, just softened by age and framed with years I'd never been part of. Neither of us spoke for a long time. And then, finally, she said it. I've thought about this moment every day. Her voice didn't tremble. Mine did when I tried to reply. That conversation stretched for hours. We talked about everything and nothing. My childhood, her life, the space between us neither of us had chosen, but both of us had lived with. She told me about the guilt. I told her about the emptiness. There were no easy answers, no dramatic apologies, no fairy tale endings scribbled out on a napkin. Just two people, bound by blood but separated by time, trying to figure out what it meant to meet in the middle. And for the first time, I understood something. She wasn't just my birth mother. She was also a person, full of her own wounds and regrets. The celebrity image the world saw was just that, an image. The real her was sitting across from me, and the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. After that first meeting, something in me shifted, though not in the way I expected. I had always thought that the moment I found her, some empty part of me would instantly fill up, like flipping a switch. But real life isn't that neat. It doesn't work like the movies. Finding her answered one question, but it raised a dozen more. And one thing became clear: the journey wasn't about one meeting or one revelation. It was about slowly unlearning a lifetime of assumptions, and learning who I was outside of the story I'd been chasing for so long. We kept in touch after that day, but cautiously. Neither of us rushed it. There were weeks when we'd trade emails like old friends, or spend hours on the phone talking about everything from books to music to childhood memories. And there were weeks when silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the gap between us had closed too late. She was honest about the fact that she'd spent most of her life hiding me from the world, and the reasons weren't always noble. Reputation. She'd spent decades building a life where perfection was packaged and sold. And I was a part of that imperfect past she couldn't rewrite, no matter how many lights and cameras stood between her and the truth. The more I got to know her, the more I understood the kind of lonely world fame can create. She'd built a life where everyone knew her name, but very few knew her heart. And here I was, a grown man, not a fan, not a journalist, not a stranger, but her son, holding a key to that hidden human side of her. And yet, I also had to admit something to myself. As much as I wanted to close that gap, as much as I wanted to belong, there was no going back. There was no version of this story where I could undo 2 decades of separate lives. The parents who raised me would always be my family. The home I grew up in, modest and quiet, would always be mine. She couldn't erase that, and neither could I. But slowly I realized, family isn't about choosing between one or the other. Sometimes it's about making room for both. We've met a handful of times since that day. No headlines, no photographers, just 2 people trying to build something real. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it hurts more than it heals. But it's real. And the more time I spend with her, the more I've stopped asking myself the question that used to haunt me. Why wasn't I enough? Why did she give me away? I don't have all the answers. Maybe I never will. But the truth is, life is messier than that. People make impossible choices when they're young, scared, and cornered by the world. And sometimes, the hardest thing isn't finding the person you've lost, it's forgiving them once you do. As for the future, I've stopped expecting it to look a certain way. I'm still finding my own path. I've started writing more, not just emails or letters, but real writing. Telling stories, both my own and the ones I've only just begun to understand. And somehow, for the first time in years, the emptiness that used to sit heavy in my chest has lightened. I don't know where this road with her will lead. I don't know if we'll ever have the kind of relationship I used to dream about as a kid. But I do know this: I've finally found the missing piece of my story. And that's enough for now. And maybe, just maybe, that's all any of us can ask for.